Steve, thanks for joining me back on the podcast again. It's funny. When I read the War of Art and some of your other books, I never thought that I'd be able to have one conversation with you, let alone a couple of now. So I'm glad that you're joining us again.
Hey, it's great. It's a real pleasure to do it, Ryan. I mean, we did one before, and I hope we can do more in the future.
Oh, I'm sure we will. I'm sure we will. As I said in the previous podcast, your work, particularly your nonfiction work, has been instrumental in me starting my financial planning practice. And then also, now that we've been running Order of Man for 6 years now, it's such a simple concept, the idea of resistance and getting your work done, but it was instrumental in helping me grow this to where it is. So I just want to say thank you.
Because when I wrote The War of Art, I thought it was for writers only.
Yeah.
It never even occurred to me that it would be for other creative people like actors or filmmakers or something. But how did it affect you, or what hit you in the financial planning thing? Was it about cold calling and stuff like that, or what was it?
Not so much that. Here's the best analogy I can give you is I spent some time in the military and I spent a lot of time when I was younger playing sports. And I've always used this analogy that you would never go into a football game or you would never go into a little battle without knowing something about your enemy. And if you do remain ignorant, you expose yourself to all sorts of potential threats that could potentially derail you, or in the case of battle, quite literally get you killed. So when I read the War of Art, it was good for me to finally put a face and a name with what I was experiencing. And as I put a face to it, it became more tangible so that I could more easily deal with the resistance, the pain, and
what exactly were you feeling? What exactly what form did resistance take for you?
For me, it was a lot of frustration. And also I tended to look at what other people were doing. And I always thought, well, if they're doing it, I should be doing it. And I couldn't quite figure out why that was the case. And so there was a lot of frustration and contention and even animosity towards other high producers because I wasn't producing it for myself. And so the resistance for me was the comparison of falling into other people, what other people were doing, and not using it as a tool for motivation, but using it as a tool for, well, this doesn't work, or I'm not good at this. And then really using it as a referendum against me. Yes, exactly.
Okay. That's very interesting.
Yeah, but then, I realized through reading that book and through doing this work that it didn't really have anything to do with me as a human being as much as it had to do with my actions. And so it's very objective at this point. Hey, if you want the results that Steve, you have, or I have, or anybody else has, it's not personal. Resistance doesn't care, right? It's not after you personally.
Right. It seems like it, but it's not. Yeah.
Right. And then I realized, it's not a referendum on me. It's a referendum on my actions, or in this case, lack thereof. So I'm just going to do different things and then I'll produce a different result. And over the course of 6 years in my financial planning practice and 6 years now doing this podcast, that's what I've realized. It's not personal. It's just the way it is. So deal with it and make better choices, do better actions, and you'll produce a different result.
Very interesting.
Yeah. What do you notice some common themes when you talk with other individuals about this, artists or creatives of sorts that they experience? Are there commonalities or common threads you see in the way resistance manifests itself?
What's interesting is that across the board, it seems to be the voice that we hear in our head, the voice of resistance, seems to be very similar. And it's a lot of times it's just beating yourself up. It's a voice of fear and a voice of undermining your self-belief. For instance, who do you think you are to take on this new project, whatever it is? You? You're too old, you're too young, you're too fat, you're too skinny, you're the wrong race, you're the wrong sex, you're the wrong color, whatever it is. Um, and further to that, your ideas are really old hat. It's been done 1,000 times before, much better than you could ever do it. What do you think you bring to the table that hasn't been done before? That kind of thing. The sort of beating up of oneself to stop you from even beginning whatever this project is.
I'm sure you're familiar with the concept and idea of the imposter syndrome. That's what it actually
Yeah,
sounds like to me.
definitely. Yeah, exactly. Which is just another form of resistance. In fact, that's sort of, I guess, basically what I was just articulating. Who do you think you are? You're not the real thing.
Yeah.
Um,
You know
and
what
the
was
other thing is
interesting?
how much people deflect into vices and into negative stuff, drinking, drugs, abuse of others, abuse of themselves, um, distractions, Facebook, all of that kind of stuff.
Why do you think people do that?
Because it's a fear to face whatever it is that you want to do. Like for instance, here I am. I'm in front of this keyboard, right? So if I have a new book in mind that I want to do, I'm going to feel tremendous resistance radiating off that keyboard, right? Don't do this for all the reasons we talked about, right? You're afraid to do, you're afraid of failure, you're afraid of success, et cetera, et cetera. So where does that energy go? Where does it go? It goes into some distraction. It's like instead of sitting down here doing my work today, maybe I'll, just head over to the beach, or I'll go skiing, or I'll, waste my time in some other way. I'll get on Facebook or something like that and just waste my time. It's, just, I know there's a word in psychology, displacement activities.
Hmm. It's funny is as you talk about that, I think about the concept of procrastination and our wonderful ability to fool ourselves into believing that we're actually being productive. For example, let's take social media. A lot of my world, especially when it comes to my career, revolves around me putting myself out there in public on Facebook, on Insta, on all these other
Huh?
platforms, and I can very easily and quite honestly justify being on social media. But if my intent is to build a business, great. More often than not, my intent is to keep me from sending the email,
Uh,
making the phone call, doing
uh,
the work that I know I ought to be doing.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing about resistance is that it's so diabolical that in even these nuanced ways it can tell you like, well, gee, Ryan, your business is social media, so you should be on it. You should be out there exploring this thing. And here's something interesting. Here's Rich Roll's podcast. He's interviewing Light Watkins today. That's really going to help you. You should watch that thing. And partly you should, because it is good for you. But while you're spending that hour, you're not doing whatever else you're going to be doing.
Right. I found
Same
that
thing for me,
when
same thing for writers, absolutely.
Yeah, I think we're all in the same boat. Here's the funny thing though. I believe, and you can tell me if I'm wrong here, but I believe that there is an overwhelming percentage of the population who believes that if they're walking the right path, then everything will be easy. You'll feel good all the time. You'll only be doing the things that you enjoy, that everything will be blissful. And I personally have not found that to be true. Maybe I'm doing it wrong. I don't know.
No, I think you hit really something really on the head there, Ryan, because I mean, I certainly believe that for years. And that really is, I think maybe it comes from advertising. Maybe it comes from just the stuff that we're fed from birth, that if we take the right product or take a certain, eat the right brand of Raisin Bran, everything is going to be great. Or even in something like psychology, if we go to therapy and we only change this and this and this about ourselves, everything is going to be great. But in fact, it's absolutely not true. And this life is hard, and it is about adversity. And that force that I call resistance with a capital R is there every second of the day as a negative force working against us. I always say that the playing field is not level at all. It is slanted against you. And that's why anything that we can do in our minds to embrace the hard life or the adversity filled life, and grasp that that's reality. That's not like a hard thing or hard times that are coming. That's reality. I mean, if we were the caveman, right? We wake up in the morning, there's no supermarket, there's no nothing. We got to go out and track down a mastodon with our buddies, and drive them over a cliff, right? And do whatever it takes. And maybe it's 10 below zero out there, whatever. The kids are screaming, they're hungry, we get, that's life the way it is on the planet, for all of us. I think we get it. It's easy today because we live in a world where there are supermarkets and we can go down and get, hamburger, and it's all packed in a little, plastic box for us, and we have air conditioning, we have heat, we have, all of these distractions. We're not going to die right tomorrow, but that's really an artificial reality. And our internal workings, I mean, this, Ryan, this is what your whole order of man is about, is our internal software comes from the caveman days. It comes from those millennia when life was really hard. And we are happier, I think, when we embrace that. And of course, we have to sort of artificially create that today too, a thing like training, like going to the gym or something like that, or running races or something like that. It's totally artificial, but it recreates that world of adversity that is our natural being. I mean, we were made, human beings, for an adverse life, right? Sure. That's why, we didn't have claws, we don't have fangs, we can't run fast, we can't see, we can't smell. So we've had to, live this life of adversity, and that's what we were made for.
It's funny, as I moved here to Maine, I found out after being here for about 3 or 4 months, I went to the local convenience store just down the road, and we got to be friends with one of the ladies who works there. And she informed me that my wife and I had been dubbed in the neighborhood the weird workout people. and I was like, well, what do you mean? And she would drive by and she would see us, carrying these big Atlas stones and flipping tires and working out and running around the property. And I just found it fascinating. And I thought to myself, well, why is that the case? And I came to the conclusion that Mainers, they don't need to fabricate working out. They're working in the fields. They're working in the factories. They're doing hard work. They're preparing. There's a phrase here in Maine that you're either preparing for winter or you're dealing with winter.
I never heard it. That's great. Yeah.
So the concept of working out is foreign. It's like, isn't that work? Aren't you chopping wood? I'd hit the tire with my sledgehammer, and I'm sure people were thinking, why is that guy doing that right now? Why isn't he chopping wood as he's preparing for winter? So you're right. We have to fabricate a lot of this stuff. Absolutely. Yeah. And, the other thing is dealing with resistance as the reality is making sure that we are preparing ourselves for the inevitable hardships that we'll face. We've created this life of relative ease and comfort. And I've seen so many men, just through the work I've done here over the past 6 years, get completely derailed by things that frankly shouldn't be derailing them, but they have no perspective on what's hard and what isn't.
Yeah. Well, that is true. And that is the way life is these days. It's just too easy, and we grow up and we think that it's supposed to be easy, and it's not. And and it isn't even just the nature of like earning a living or the fact that there's winter or something like that. It's this thing in our heads, it's this negative force in our heads that is constantly trying to sabotage us.
Do you feel like you at this point, with the work that you've done, both from a nonfiction and a fiction perspective, have, I don't want to say conquered resistance, but are you so aware of it at this point that it is less of an issue for you, or is it something that you still deal with immensely?
No, it never goes away, and it never gets any easier. And in fact, it gets even more subtle and more diabolical, And I'm dealing with it right now on a bunch of different levels, There's a new book that I'm trying to start, and I've got that voice in my head, nobody's going to care about this book. Why are you even thinking of it? Whatever reputation you've established, you're going to put in the toilet when people see this book. It's such a dumb idea. And then also, I'm promoting a new book, or I'm trying to promote a new book that we'll talk about a little bit here. And so I've sort of dedicated myself to working on promotion on this thing for now, and that becomes resistance. That becomes a form of resistance because I'm not doing my actual writing work, but yet I have to do it. So kind of like what you were talking about social media, I've got to do it. I've got to support, my work and stuff like that, but it is a form. And then I'm having resistance to even doing that, because it is good and it is positive, then I'm trying to slough off and not do that. So I've got resistance on top of resistance. It never goes away, at least in my experience.
Yeah, well, look, you've got more experience with it than I do, and I'm very much in the same boat. Whether I have to, with all due respect, jump on a podcast that I'm excited about, I'm excited about this conversation, and still I'm like, oh, what are we going to talk about? Is it going to go well? Are people going to appreciate the conversation? And so something I'm immensely excited about, there's still resistance about it. I just don't understand it.
I have a question for you, Ryan. Since we're talking about podcasts here, like when you're going into this one, how do you prepare for it? Do you have questions that you want to ask? Do you have an intention? What's your mindset when you go into this?
So the way that I used to do podcasts is I would quite literally have 10 to 15 questions written out. These are the questions that I wanted to get to and wanted to ask. And I realized fairly quickly into the podcasting world that the conclusion I came to anyways is that when I was asking those questions, I was doing my guest, you, a disservice. And I was also doing my audience, those men who were listening, a disservice. Because what I would do is I would ask you, for example, a question that I had listed out, and you would give me a very insightful and thoughtful response. And rather than exploring that response, I'd be like, okay, great. And I would just check it off the list,
right.
And I would move to the next question. So I wouldn't allow for an organic conversation the way that we would over dinner or, a gathering or something like that. So what I do now is I know my guests. I've followed you. We've been connected for probably a year or so at this point. I read your books. I read your works. And so I might make a few little bullet points. In fact, I've got them right here of topics, of veins that I want to discuss, but I have no expectations for this discussion other than maybe a few things I want to address. And I really try to let the conversation go organically. And I've noticed that the men who listen really resonate with two gentlemen sitting down and having a conversation about things that maybe were anticipated and things that, frankly, weren't anticipated. And the guys really resonate with that.
So let me ask you another question. I'm going to wind up interviewing you here, Ryan.
I like it. Let's do it.
I'm sure that you are very much aware of who your audience is and what a typical, listener to the Order of Man is and what issues are important to them. I could sort of guess at it, but I obviously don't know it like you do. When you're preparing for an interview, are you consciously trying to serve the audience, to try and to give them the kind of meat and potatoes that they're tuning in for?
Yeah, definitely. What I try to do, Steve, is I try to think about what are the problems that the men I shouldn't say it that way. What are the problems that a man who's listening to this is dealing with? And I say a man versus the men because here's how I know when I'm on the right track. When somebody reaches out to me and says, Ryan, I'm really grateful for that podcast or for that article or for that post because it felt like you were speaking exactly to me. Are you in my thoughts? Are you in my head? Are you in my dreams? That to me lets me know that I'm on the right track. And it's fairly easy for me because we hear this concept of avatar, like who's your avatar, right? I'm sure you think of the same thing when you're writing books and doing what you do. I'm my own avatar. Honestly, I feel like I'm the biggest recipient of having these discussions just as much as anybody else. I'm I'm 38 years old. I've got a young family. I'm starting a business. I'm kind of feeling where, my role in life is and trying to excel, but trying to balance it with other my duties and responsibilities. It's the same problems all the men who listen are dealing with. So I've got a little bit of a cheat in that way, in that I am my own avatar.
Ah, well, that's the way it should be, I think. I mean, certainly, I feel like when I'm writing books, I'm my own avatar too. I feel like I'm
Mm.
writing for myself as much as anything else. I'm writing because certain issues are eating at me or are fascinating me or whatever. And I figure if I don't even really know who a typical reader of mine is, I just sort of ask myself, what is it that I'm driven by? And that that I need to deal with, and let me put that out as honestly as I can. And that's when, just like what you said, that's when you get the feedback where somebody writes in and says, wow, I felt that it was just, you're speaking directly to me. You're inside my head. When I try to second guess it, I sometimes or almost always go wrong.
Yeah, I think there's a tendency to try to game things, right? I'm going to try to manipulate this or
Yeah,
massage it
yeah, yeah,
or over, do it just to like
yeah.
fit this mold. And it comes across as very disingenuous. But that leads me to a point that I did want to ask you about. How do you know if you're going to write a fictional work or a nonfiction work? It seems like many of the authors out there are either fictional writers in this specific genre or they're self-help authors in this
Uh-huh.
specific vein. Like, but you're all over the place
Yeah,
in
it's
a good way. In a good way.
um, it's a great question. I mean, I'm definitely a believer. I know I think I've said this before to you. I'm a believer in the muse. I believe in the goddess. I believe that writers are being kind of led. Just like if you looked at, say, all of Bruce Springsteen's albums all in a row, you could kind of see how one sort of led to another, and that one might be different from another, but there's kind of a theme there. And he's sort of exploring this side and that side. He's kind of being led. And I sort of feel that way too. Like I will write 3 or 4 fiction pieces in a row, and then somehow the voice in my head or the goddess or whoever is inspiring me will say, now it's time for you to do something different.
Hmm.
And sometimes I'm not really, I'm kind of an editor's nightmare because I'm not in one lane, where you can say, it's like a box of Cheerios. Every time you go to the store, you get the same thing.
Sure.
Whereas with me, I'll sometimes I'll have people will respond to what I'm doing, and they'll say, "Well, I want more," and then I'm doing something over here, and they go, I can't bring them with me. So it is kind of an issue, but sometimes I don't know. I'm blathering on here, right? But sometimes when I'm writing fiction, it's about something. If it's about this ancient Spartans or it's about Alexander the Great or wherever it is, it's about certain themes of masculinity or of challenge or of whatever. And but you can never say it overtly in a piece of fiction, right? It always has to come out through the story. And
Hmm.
sometimes I say, you know what? I want to just say this straight out. I want to say, here's an issue. Here's what we're dealing with. Here's how it, the best way to handle it, in my opinion. And so then I'll write a book like The War of Art or some of its follow-ups.
Yeah, I imagine so many different questions I have here, but I imagine when you talk about an editor or a publisher's nightmare, it seems to me that a lot of these houses, businesses, organizations would really just like you to plug into the formula that works. It's like,
Definitely. I mean, why not? If you
why
can,
reinvent it?
a Ford F-150 and it sells, let's build another one.
Exactly.
But but if you're at all creative, or if you have an entrepreneurial point of view, or if you're an artist, you just can't live like that, because you're being
Hmm.
led to other stuff. Your soul, your muse, your whatever is calling. You're evolving, you're growing, right? And once you've done, like an actor, if Tom Hanks has played this certain role, he doesn't want to play it again. He's
Hmm.
already done it. He's looking for the next thing. And I think anybody, if you're writing songs, if you're doing video games, if you've already done something, you don't want to do it again, even though your editor, your publisher, your music, whatever, they may want you to do that, which is sort of a classic thing, right? With bands, with rock bands or anything, right?
Sure.
The record company wants them to give give the audience the same thing they just got, but just a little bit different. And, the band, they want to try something new.
You would think that an artist would want to. My wife and I, this leads me to a conversation or a debate that her and I always have, which is, we look at actors or actresses and she'll say, well, this person's a great actor. I'm like, that Harrison Ford is an example. She's like, Harrison Ford's a great actor. I'm like, Harrison Ford is Han Solo in every movie, every single movie. He just has a different name, but he's the same character. Does that make him a great actor? Or do you take somebody like Tom Hanks, for example, who can play Forrest Gump and the guy from Castaway and play these myriad of roles, and he can explore all of these things and do well with some and not so great with others? That to me is the mark of an artist who wants to go out there and push himself into new positions, into new and uncomfortable situations, who really defines himself by his art of creativity.
Yeah. And yet, the weird thing is you don't want Bruce Springsteen to be too far out of who Bruce Springsteen is,
True. Yeah, good point.
Like I remember there was Cary Grant used to play a certain kind of role, right? And every now and then he would do a whole, or pick any actor you want to think of.
Sure.
Harrison Ford's a great example. It's like we sort of go to the movie because we want to see Harrison Ford, Han Solo. We want to see that guy. And if he's something too different, like 6 Days and 7 Nights, did you ever see that movie? Where it's
if I have, it's been a very long time.
It's it's sort of out of the mold, and it didn't work. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure it worked a little bit, but it was like if you're watching, you said, "Get back to the guy that we came to see."
Yeah.
So, but within that, you can be creative.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because even, I look, I know I'm knocking on Harrison Ford right here for sure, but you look at movies like The Fugitive, which were absolutely phenomenal. And then you look at a different role where he plays a bad guy, in I think the movie's called What Lies Beneath. And you're like, okay, it's still Harrison Ford, but he played a different role in his own way. And it was still a pretty dang good movie, even though it was different. Yeah. But like you said, it was still Harrison Ford and what you expected.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you have to give yourself permission in a way? I don't know if that's the right term, to be able to explore these fringes or these new ideas or things that maybe are outside of your immediate comfort zone?
Not really. I'm sort of drawn to them, I mean, the only way I have to give myself permission is sometimes I'll do a book or something and I can say to myself at the start, this is not going to sell, I can just tell the people that like my stuff are not going to like this. I'm taking them into a place where they're not going to follow me at all. But I don't care usually, because I want to go there, And I'm sort of, it took me so long to find any success. And I worked for so many years with, on, just supporting myself other ways, that I kind of realized that what makes me happy is to do what I want to do. I'm really not a writer for hire. I'm not somebody that, is going to do what somebody wants me to do. I'm going to do what I want to do. And part of the price of that is sometimes the things you want to do, nobody cares about, and that's just part of the journey, I guess, but I never regret those books. I'm glad I did them, even if nobody read them.
Do you feel like if you, let's just rewind 20 or 30 years, if you could go back and tell your younger version of yourself what you just said, that I'm going to explore what I want to explore, do you feel like you would have done that? Or do you feel like at this point you've earned the right to do that at this stage in the game?
It's a great question. It's funny. I never even really, until you're right, what you said 30 years is about right. Around 1995 was about the time that I actually started writing books that were my own, Before that, I worked as a screenwriter and I did other stuff like that. And in that earlier period, it never even occurred to me. Well, it did occur to me to do what I wanted to do, but I could never sell it, And
right.
But so a lot of times it was just whatever job I can get, anybody that'll pay me, I'll do it, But once I sort of started actually writing my own books, somehow just a year, something changed in my head, and I just said, I'm just going to do, what I want to do. But part of it also, Ryan, is that a book or a movie takes like 2 years or 3 years. So as you're sitting at the threshold of that, you're about to start. You got to ask yourself, do I love this enough that I can put to, with particularly with the possibility that at the end of that, you won't make any money at all, that it'll be a complete waste of your time in terms of money.
Not only a
So,
possibility, but a strong likelihood
yeah,
that you
strong
won't make any
likelihood.
money. Yeah.
Yeah. So then you got to say to yourself, how much do I love this? Am I really willing to do it? And, there's really no alternative. If you don't love it, you're not going to be able to do it. I mean, some people write on contracts, where they get a contract, they get an advance, they get money, but I don't, and most fiction writers are like that. You have to write the whole book and then you have to sell it.
And then you promote it, sure.
So, it does come down to what do you love and what are you willing to spend a couple of years on?
Ryan Holiday, who I know you're familiar with, told me
Yeah,
something very interesting. He said, making money isn't a great reason to write a book. You have to actually believe that there's something of value that you have to share in spite of anybody else potentially believing that it's valuable, because they might not believe it's valuable, and still you have to be willing to put that work out there.
I agree with him completely. I'll go even more than that because a lot of Ryan's stuff is nonfiction stuff. He's
Right.
writing about the lives of the Stoics and
Sure.
what Stoicism is, or some of his earlier books. He has a great book, Trust Me, I'm Lying, his first
Right.
book. Um, Whereas if you're writing if you're writing a story, you're writing fiction, a lot of times, Ryan can ask himself, or a nonfiction writer can ask himself, is this topic of interest to people that read my stuff?
Hmm.
If you were going to write a book about financial planning, you could say to yourself, I know there are people out there that want this. This is good information. I'm going to put it out. That's a reason for me to do it. Or if you're writing about order of man or, a definition of masculinity, whatever it is, that there are people that are looking for that. But when you're writing a story, you're sort of in the hands of the gods, because a lot of times you don't even know what the story's really about. The deep themes of it. You're just sort of seized by something. Oh, I want to write a Western. I want to write whatever this is. So you can only ask yourself in that case, do I love it? Do I love it? Am I seized by this? Do I sort of have a feeling that there's something in here, even though I might not be able to put my fingers on it, And so it's really a leap in the dark, at least for me, a lot of the time. And you just have to go on love and just jump off the cliff.
What do you, I'm just going to pull up if you're listening to this on YouTube or watching on YouTube, you can see it, but what is it that you love about this new book, A Man at Arms? What is it for you that you thought, okay, I have to write this book?
It's a great question. And I'm not even sure I know the answer, but the character, A Man at Arms, is about it's set in the first century AD, around the time of Christ, in Jerusalem and in the Sinai Desert. That's kind of the setting. And the lead character is a guy who's sort of like the Clint Eastwood man with no name, a kind of a one-man killing machine of the ancient world, a former Roman legionary. And this character, Telamon of Arcadia is his name, is the only recurring character in any of my books. He's been in 3 other books as a minor character, but a really interesting character for me anyway. I mean, he's one of these weird characters. As a writer, a lot of times you plan characters. You go, my hero's going to be Harrison Ford. He's going to do this, this, this.
Sure.
This character of Telamon just sort of appeared on the page in these earlier books, kind of fully formed for me. And I've always wanted to do a book only about him. I've wanted to sort of follow his journey, because he's sort of, speaking of masculinity, he's kind of what I would call the warrior archetype par excellence, like a samurai, like a Clint Eastwood gunslinger, that kind of guy. But he's a dark character who's frustrated in that role and is looking to move on to whatever the next thing is. And so that's why I wanted to write this book. I wanted to kind of find out, where does he go? What's the next stage for him? And because this particular character came into my head having his own philosophy, and he would articulate it and I was really fascinated by this philosophy, because he would just show a little the tip of the iceberg of it. And I kind of wanted to go, what's deeper? what's this philosophy all about? So anyway, that's why I just wanted to explore it and see who he was and find out where he was going.
How much of your characters are representative of you in some form, whether that's something that you're actually, showing to the world, or something that's just been locked away in your brain, or maybe even some sort of aspirational goal that you have to show up like this particular character?
I think that's exactly right, Ryan. You hit the nail on the head. I mean, all the characters, including the women, including little girls, they're all part of me, but I don't know it until I put it on the page. If you
Hmm.
think about Charles Dickens and all the characters that he had, Pip and Oliver Twist and David Copperfield and all of this, um, Mr. Pickwick or whoever, all these guys. It's like an entire universe of characters that are all really him in one way or another. And I do feel that some of them are aspirational with me. Exactly right. I feel like they're sort of who I wish I was or who I wish I could become.
Hmm.
Or and this character, Telamon in A Man at Arms, he's one of those. It's like I sort of aspire to be him in a certain way, but at the same time, his issues are my issues. He may be dealing with them in the form of physical violence, whereas I'm dealing with them in something inside my head. But yeah, I mean, I think, in many ways, writing is like dreaming. When you put stuff down on a page, the concept of automatic writing, or you just kind of sit down and stream of consciousness,
Sure.
in a
Yeah.
way, it's a way of accessing your unconscious, which is helping you evolve right now. So when you write a book, particularly a story, and then you look at it afterwards, you say to yourself, holy shit, this is really about exactly what I'm dealing with now. And I just never realized it in this form. So the characters very definitely are almost like characters in a dream. You might have a dream, and in a dream, you confront a samurai or something like that, or a little girl or whatever. And when you analyze that dream, you get to the point you say, that's me. I mean, that character is me. That character is dealing with something I'm dealing with. So I know I'm getting a little deep here, but you you any creative thing is a mysterious process. Songwriting, video game writing, even starting a new business. Um, it's it's something that isn't yet born in you that wants to be born. And you don't even know why. You're sort of pulled, you're compelled to bring it forth into reality. I'm sure that was with you for this podcast. Not knowing you, it's not like we know each other real well, but I
Sure.
guarantee you that Order of Man and the whole concept was something in your guts. And you felt like, I've got to somehow get this out there into the material world. And a podcast is a great way to do it. Am I right? Or
To a degree. I remember talking with a friend of mine. We got into the financial planning practice and business about the same time. And I remember for years and years telling him, Greg, I know I'm meant for something more than this. I know I'm meant for something more. And he would ask me, he'd say, what? I'm like, I have no idea. And so when I started Order of Man, it wasn't really with the goal of putting myself at the head of the pack or positioning myself as better or more knowledgeable or more manly than anybody else. It was, I want to figure some of this stuff out and I want to be the ideal version of myself. It was aspirational, like you're talking about. And it's pretty interesting. Again, I said it earlier in our conversation. I feel like I'm the biggest recipient of what we're doing here because over the course of 6 years, sure, we've helped thousands and thousands of men and their families and everything else. But I feel selfish at times because I have helped myself. I have become who I wanted to be, and I can realize how much further I need to go. So it was very aspirational for me in this journey. Definitely.
yeah, I think that really, the journey I'm talking about for myself and you're talking about for yourself are basically the same thing. We're like you say, you had a sense that you were meant for something more,
Mm-hmm.
something, that was more you, right? Not like it was better or anything like that, but that it was more
Sure.
coming from the center of your being, right? And that's kind of the same thing I think for me as a writer. Each time I write a book, I try to get more. to the center of what it is that I am, even though I don't know what that is. I don't know what that is until it appears, until I
Right.
write it.
Interesting. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about, what makes us human, what makes us men, and I've come to the conclusion that one of the answers, I'm not sure this is the only answer, but one of the answers is this idea of consciousness, where we can project ourselves out into a future date and time, or even project ourselves into a character, for example. Do you feel like it's easier to work through some of your own issues and thought processes through a character rather than looking at it through the lens of Stephen Pressfield?
Yes. And in fact, but again, I'd say, Ryan, that it's not like, for me at least, I know the answer at the start. I don't. It's the process of writing something, and almost it's almost like you're filming a character, and the character's doing his thing, and you're just filming it,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
or you're recording it, um, and you don't really know until it's done, and then I don't think it's a direct scenario. It's not like you can look at a character and say, oh, I see that this character did this, therefore I have to do something in my life. I think in some crazy way, it's like the Walt Whitman thing of we contain multitudes, that I consider this physical body of me, and me as Stephen Pressfield that goes to the grocery store or writes a check or whatever. I consider that to be like the least of who I am. In fact, I almost dismiss that completely. And whatever makes me up is, like, if to use an analogy, go back to, say, Bruce Springsteen, it's music. It's this thing that's out there in the air. And somehow I think, I mean, it's maybe going a little too far, but I think that when we die, this may go away, but that stuff doesn't go away, not because people are reading your books or listening to your music, but somehow it's out there in the universe. It's somehow, it continues to exist in some vibrational form, I think.
Are you talking
Even a
about
family
your
is like that. It's your
legacy?
children. I'm
Are
sorry, I
you
interrupted
referring?
you.
No, no, and I interrupted you. So, are you talking about your legacy, or talking about your own existence? What
I
is it
think
that
it's
you're
my
referring
own
to?
existence, not my legacy. I don't think it has anything to do with anybody else actually accessing it. I just think that it's, and actually, I'm thinking this right now, Ryan, just as we're talking about it. I've never thought about this before, but I do think that we exist on so many different levels. Go back to Dickens for a second, and those hundreds of characters that he created, or that I should say came out of him somehow,
Mm-hmm.
through a higher level, higher dimension, or whatever. They were part of him. They were. You can't really separate him from them. From Oliver
Right.
Twist, from David Copperfield, from Pip, from
Sure.
Magwitch, whatever. In fact, the least interesting character in the whole aspect there is Dickens himself, if you ask me. So he really was sort of a medium by which these other entities entered the world, but they were him, and you can't separate the two.
That's an interesting thought. I actually feel a little bit like that when it comes to what we're doing here with Order of Man, because I think people listen to this podcast or might see a post that I make on social media and paint me in some light that if they met me in person, I fear that maybe they would be sadly disappointed because I'm not all that exciting. I'm not all that unique or special.
I
Those,
suspect that even
those
Harrison Ford feels that way. I
maybe,
certainly feel that way.
I think we paint and observe things the way that we need them to in the moment, whether that's because we need an excuse for mediocrity or whether because we need some sort of motivation to become more of who we are. So I think we have a tendency of looking at people through a lens that we need them to be in the moment for either the right or frankly wrong reasons.
Yeah, yeah. But of course, when we project something like that onto another person, someone who might be a hero of ours, that we finally meet and we go, oh, I'm really disappointed. He's just a regular person just like me. You know,
Yeah.
that's really on us. We shouldn't have that expectation of them, you know? I mean, it's really, the real question is, who are we? You know, and are we evolving to our thing? But I think going back to what I was saying before, even having a family, having children, in a way, is sort of like Dickens and his characters, right? When you have kids and they start to reveal who they are, right? And they already are somebody, right? They came in and they already were somebody.
Sure.
It is. I mean, you're part of them; they're part of you. It's a whole constellation that you can't really pull out a single individual and say, "Oh, that's it," you know.
Right.
And
Yeah,
going back to your father, your mom and dad, you know, people before you.
I've got somebody in my very close circle who, will occasionally complain about their children being, wild and crazy and rambunctious, and they and they say to me occasionally, "I just don't understand why they're like this." And I'm like, really? Like, do you not? You really don't understand why they're behaving the exact same way that you're behaving right now? But we have a tendency of I do it too, but we have a tendency of doing that. It's very interesting that we would do that.
Yeah.
When it comes to fictional work, I will be very frank with you. Over the past couple of years is really about the only time in my life where I've actually read fictional work. I think prior to that, the only book that I had read was, maybe Old Man and the Sea when I was in high school, because that was a requirement of the book. But I used to think that it was purely for entertainment, that it was just supposed to be some sort of vanity or entertainment. There wasn't really anything to be drawn from it because I'm a very pragmatic person. But I've actually come to the conclusion over the past couple of years through reading your works and a mutual friend of ours, Jack Carr, that, yeah, sure, there's value in entertainment. There's nothing wrong with that. But then there's also so many lessons, life lessons that are applicable to your individual circumstance that you can apply and gain a perspective that maybe you wouldn't gain just by reading a do X, Y, and Z and your life will be better kind of book.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think fiction is tremendously underrated these days. You know, just like you're saying, Ryan, a lot of us think, well, I mean, even in school now, when they're establishing a curriculum that's sort of like, well, what is it that we can put that people are going to be able to use? You know, like how to manage your finances or how to fix your Chevy or whatever it is. And we're not going to study Thucydides or Herodotus or Lao Tzu or anything like that, or Hemingway or something like that. And I think it's a terrible mistake because I think in many ways, fiction, let me say the novel is, and movies, I'll put movies up there in the same place,
Sure.
is the highest form of communication because it can take you into another person's consciousness. You read a book about a crippled girl in the slums of Sao Paulo, right? And her life. And you would say to yourself, well, why would I want to read that? I mean, is that going to help me in my life, you know? Or a movie about that, let's say. But when you, the act of empathy, of identifying with somebody else, of leaving your own consciousness and entering the consciousness of somebody else, I mean, that's an incredible liberating thing. And there's really no other medium other than, say, movies and fiction that can do that. And but I'm like you, I resist it too. And I think it's a form of resistance with an R, capital R, because in some sense, I think we know it's going to change us. We know it's going to challenge us. I'm talking about good stuff, not bad stuff. And we resist it. Like I know people have told me, now I'm going to switch back to my book, The War of Art. People have told me that I've had this book on my nightstand for 18 months. And I finally opened it, last night. And it's like somehow they knew that when they opened that book, it was going to challenge them. It was going to make them see something they didn't want to see. And then, they write me, they say, oh, thank God I finally opened it. It really was great, But I think the same thing is true of fiction. And I'm guilty of it too. I have a book sitting on my night table that I know are going to blow my mind, and I kind of want to stay in my comfort zone, and watch Game of Thrones and not worry about, what that new book is going to be.
You said something interesting. You said, I'm talking about the good stuff, not the bad stuff. Can you explain what you mean by that?
I mean, there are bad books, there are good books, and
What makes a bad book?
um, I think I would say it's the depth of what it gets into. If you
Mm,
read, I'm just thinking of another Hemingway book, The Sun Also Rises, which I don't know if you've ever read it,
I have
but
not.
it's just a great book. And what makes it great is it's the depth that it gets into in terms of human nature and what life is all about, but
Hmm.
also the talent of the writer. That he won the Nobel Prize. People knock Hemingway, but he was a master. He invented a whole way of writing. A lot of other people are masters too. But it's like, what's the difference between Michael Jordan and somebody, that might be a good basketball player in college or something? There's a difference.
Sure, of
And
course.
when we watch Michael Jordan, we experience a kind of aesthetic joy, just to watch him, shoot a foul shot. Um, so that's the difference between good and bad. Certain writers last, and certain writers come and go.
And sometimes it's hard, you talk about Jordan, for example. Sometimes it's hard to articulate what the greatness is, which I think is actually what makes them great. Because if you knew, then you would just be able to formulate that. But it's the little bit of mystery and the quote unquote X factor that actually makes it enticing and makes that individual truly unique and gifted
Yeah,
and
it
and
is that
talented.
X factor that you can't put your finger on. I mean, there are a lot of guys that can shoot the shots that he shot or
Of
Kobe
course.
shot or some of the guys that are incredible out there, but somehow it's an X factor that you just can't put your finger on. Did you watch that series about the Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan? I'm blanking on
I never I know what you're talking about. I don't know what it's called either because I never did. Everybody's
The
probably shaking their
Last
heads at
Dance,
both
The
of us.
Last
Yes,
Dance.
thank you. Yes.
And it was so good. I mean, I watched it like 10 times, and it's 10 episodes. But the one of the things that was really interesting to me is they would interview Michael Jordan, and he would be talking about another player that got the MVP that year, Karl Malone or somebody like that, and they would be like, great Hall of Fame, great player. So Michael Jordan would say something to the effect of, when they compared this guy to me, I was really pissed off. It's like, you, because he knew what the X factor was that he had. and
Yeah.
and in his mind, this other player that was a great player was just not in his league. And he knew what that was. I mean, I wish that he could sort of articulate it, but when you watch that show, The Last Dance, it comes out in every frame. What made him so great.
It's interesting. I've had the opportunity now, and it has been an amazing opportunity to interview something like 330 successful, highly, highly successful men. And one of the threads or the themes that I see amongst a lot of these men is that it seems to me they have some sort of chip on their shoulder. Like, I don't know what it is,
That's really
something to
interesting.
prove, or,
Yeah.
it's not arrogance. I wouldn't say it's arrogance. It's just some sort of like edge, that they have that other individuals don't have. Do you recognize that?
Absolutely. And I think you think, well, Michael Jordan is a classic
Of
example of that. Tom
course.
Brady's another guy. It's
Of
like they picked
course.
Tom Brady, whatever he was, drafted 289th or something. That has fueled him, for his whole career. And you're right. I can think of a bunch of other people that are exactly that same way. I think it's that on some level, these people know how good they are or how good they can be.
Hmm.
And, uh, and it just really pisses them off when other
Yes.
people don't see it. And what's also interesting is that you can see that the people really close to them, like their mom and dad, or the people in their posse that they grew up with, they know how good these guys are too. Like LeBron James, his buddies, they knew how good he was when he was 14 years old, and they too would get pissed off if other people didn't see that.
Yeah.
So,
Interesting.
but I think we all have a sort of a germ of that gift. And if we can only follow it, then we're on the right track.
I like that you call it a gift. I feel the same way, and I don't hear people talk about it like that. You know, I think in popular culture, we've been led to believe that if you exhibit any sort of pride in who you are or how you show up or the performance that you give, that you're arrogant and you're egotistical and you're selfish and self-centered, and all of these descriptives we use to push people down. And I believe the opposite. I think you should be proud of the work you do. I think you should be excited about what you bring to the world. I think you should want to compete and want to win and want to do your best. It's just not taught in popular culture.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's part of being in a democracy, where we're kind of told, well, we're all equal, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that we're equal before the law, right? That doesn't mean we're equal.
Of
But at the
course.
same time, as we're told that, so it's like in school, if you try to stand out, you get hammered down, right? They always say the thing about the daisy that rises the highest gets snipped off.
Yes.
So we're taught that. But at the same time, we're given the opposite message, which is like a Michael Jordan message of like, you can be great, you can be anything, you can be president, you can be, and I think we're sort of torn in that, It was a big issue for me. I'm a child of the 60s, and I kind of came up in that era where it was like to be ambitious was really bad, because it meant you were going to exceed other people or push other people aside or whatever it is. And it was very liberating for me at some point where I just said to myself, you know what? I am ambitious. I do have aspirations. And sort of the bottom line for me is like, you got bookshelves behind you there, Ryan.
Sure.
There's room for everybody's book in the world on that bookshelf. The bookshelf is infinite.
Yeah.
And we can all, find whatever it is that is our thing and do it. And it doesn't necessarily put anybody else down. It's our gift to the world. And the bookshelf is infinite.
And that goes back to something you said earlier about that imposter syndrome where people think, well, it's already been written about or discussed or talked about, or, there's plenty of books where I've picked up a book and I've gone through the first chapter and I'm like, I don't like this book. I can't read it, or it doesn't resonate with me, or it's awkward, or it's written in a way that doesn't jive with me. And so I used to think that I had to read it. If I crack a book, I have to read it. I have to finish it. And now I'm like, no, that doesn't resonate with me. But there's quite literally 10 million other books that I can choose from that actually would resonate with me, that will serve me, that will help me. We can find that, and there's space for everybody.
Yes. But thinking of it from the point of view of you're the one that's writing the book, giving yourself permission to write that book, to write the book that is your life. It's not necessarily a book. In fact, it's probably not a book. It's probably something completely different. But if we just see the bookshelf as a metaphor of there's a place for all of us, for everybody's unique talent, I think.
Well, and I've thought about it in my own life when I'm faced with difficult choices or even temptations of things that I know I shouldn't be doing, or excuses maybe not to do the things that I should. I have used the exercise of saying, what would the ideal version, which is just synonymous with character, right? What would this particular character that I've made up in my mind, what would that person do? And using that practice has allowed me to make better decisions that I don't think I would have made in any other context.
Do you mean that person, that version of you? Is that what you mean?
Correct. It's just a character of myself, right? What would the guy who was, operating at the pinnacle of his achievement, or in 20 years, what would the 50-year-old Ryan do? Who's mature and has experience and is wealthy and ambitious and serving other people? What would that guy do? And it allows me to make different decisions that I wouldn't make at 38.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I never thought about that before. That's a good one.
So I want to go back to something you talked about with fictional work and good books and bad books. This might be an interesting question, but I've always wondered, is there a way, because I have little systems and tools that I use, especially when it comes to nonfiction. I might highlight and then tab and then make a note in the margin and then go back and review it. I have systems for that. Are there systems or ways to read a fictional book? Like some people say, just read it and just enjoy it. I'm like, well, maybe there's a better way to read a fictional book. I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on that.
That's a great question. I mean, I think sometimes when it's your job, like it's my job, and I've sort of learned, what a story is, what act one, what act two, act three, and at certain points that sometimes you can know too much and it kind of
Mm.
spoils the. I would say that the way to read a book is to just immerse yourself in it and surrender to it, and let the artist take you on a journey like an e-ticket ride. And and if you read, I'm also a big believer in reading things multiple times. This is another Ryan Holiday thing that he says too, and I think you can read it the second time and try to analyze it a little and look for those tabs and those things. But I think the first time, I would just read. I read just for the emotion of it, and try to get swept up in the story, and
Mm.
then later go back and say, what the hell was this about? Why did this grab me so much? Why did I love that scene? What did the writer do that made that work so well?
That's a good point because I even think about that with movies that I watch. I talk about Braveheart quite a bit actually, and I think about the first time I watched that movie, it really resonated with me deeply. It resonated with me, and then you go back and you watch it for the second time, and the 10th time, and the 100th time, and you start picking out new things that you didn't experience before, and you're able to quantify maybe 10, 20 years down the road why it resonated with you so deeply the first time you ever saw the movie or read the book.
Yeah. And maybe it resonated with you for different reasons than it would resonate for me. That's a whole other thing.
and
By the
and
way,
maybe
I happen
even
to,
20 years later it's something different. It resonates with you in a different way than it
yeah.
did 20 years earlier.
By the way, I happen to be friends with Randy Wallace, who wrote Braveheart. And I don't know if you know the story about how he wrote it, but he was like at his wits' end. He had, his whole career, everything had sort of crashed, and he was like literally on his knees praying to God. What do I do? What do I do? And somehow out of that came the idea to do Braveheart, which at the time he thought was a crazy idea. Who's going to want to read about this Scottish guy that nobody's ever heard of? And but he again he loved it. He was seized by it. He believed in it. He put his soul into it, and I think he was like born to write that, and it worked. So, but it came out of a very, very dark moment for him where he didn't know what to do.
Yeah. It's funny. Him and I have actually been texting back and forth because I'd
Ah,
like him to come on the podcast. So we've been playing a little bit of phone tag,
oh,
but
he's great. He'll be great on this.
I would just love to have a conversation about that story that you're sharing and how this came to be and how he feels about impacting the same way you impacting quite literally millions and millions of people across the planet for the better. It's phenomenal. It's amazing to me. You talk about storytelling being the oldest form of communication. And it is amazing to me in the midst of social media and podcasts and Facebook and Instagram and all of these texting, emails, these mediums of communication, that storytelling continues to be the most important form of communication for people.
It's true. It's almost you think, well, why? What are stories just are fun? What's so great about them? But we need them. We need them to kind of guide us. And if you think about now that TV and particularly cable TV and all of these streaming services have come online, I mean, there are stories up the yin yang out there. I
Of
mean, it
course,
used to be like one or two movies a week, and that would be it. A couple of dumb TV shows now, and not only are there so many of them, but they're so good.
they
Uh,
are.
so yeah, and we need them. You can't get enough of them.
I get disappointed if I don't pull up Netflix or Amazon and see a new series on there every couple of
Yeah,
days. I'm like, well, what the
yeah,
heck? What's going on? Slow
yeah,
week or
right.
something, you know? Oh, well, Steve, I really appreciate you, and I appreciate you coming on this podcast and what you've done and how you've impacted my life and other people that have been impacted by the work you do. I'd like you to share just a little bit, maybe briefly, about your book, A Man at Arms, and then also you sent me this, which I'm really appreciative of because just to show this off a little bit, I've got my signed copy here. But also you sent me another gift, which I know is actually right behind you, and I want you to show that gift off that you had gifted me as well.
Well, this is actually when A Man at Arms comes out, that book in another month. This is a mug that's made by a wonderful young potter named Joel Cherico, who's a real artist. And it's a replica. If you can see, this is a Spartan shield with the lambda on the front of it. And it's a replica of a famous mug from antiquity, the Spartan Kothon, which the Spartan army used to carry on campaign when they went to war. And the reason when they have to drink out of streams and rivers, and what made this thing interesting was it had a dark interior. So if you were drinking mud, it wouldn't show up too bad. And
You
also
wouldn't
it
have
had
to
a
see
kind of
it.
a concave lip. And nobody has seen one of these in 2,000 years. And Joel Cherico he and I kind of talked about this, and he invented this. He made his shot at doing this. So when A Man at Arms comes out in a month, we're going to have a contest. Here's the book. And we're going to be giving away a bunch of these, along with some other things. And but if you're interested in them now, this actually retails for 145 bucks. And it's Joel Cherico, Cherrico, Cherico Pottery. And this will be a gift or a contest prize when A Man at Arms comes out in a month.
Excellent. We'll make sure everybody knows, because I use mine just about every day, and yeah, your work is phenomenal. Okay, I'm going to go back to something you said earlier. You said there's this book that you might be working on, and you're like wrestling with it and wondering if people are going to like it, or you can put it out there. Can you share any of that information about anything that's upcoming down the road?
Well, there's a couple of things coming. This book, actually, we talked about Ryan Holiday. He gave me the idea for this book. Ryan Holiday has a book called The Daily Stoic. Have you seen that?
Sure.
It's
Yeah, I
like a
have it.
calendar book, and each day there's a kind of a short thing about Stoicism, whatever. And it's inspirational. Each morning you read it. And so he said to me, you should do one of these, Steve, based on your stuff of the War of Art and the various novels that you've written. So I did. And Ryan gave me the title, which is The Daily Pressfield. So I'm working
Awesome.
on that now. It's a little egomaniacal, but it's, a short thing each day. And hopefully it's inspirational. And hopefully it has some, something that we can hang on to.
Yeah,
So
I'm sure it will.
that's a thing that's coming up very soon.
Excellent.
Maybe
I'm
at
looking forward
Christmas.
to seeing that and getting involved with that. Well, Steve, how do we connect with you, learn more about your work? Of course, pick up a copy of the book and enter the contest you just talked about. How do we do that?
The book is called A Man at Arms. And if you just go to www.amanatarms.com, that'll tell you all the sort of stuff right there. And also I have a website that's just my name, stephenpressfield.com. Or the book is available at any bookstore, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, whatever.
Perfect. We'll sync it all up. Thanks again for joining us. I appreciate our conversations and our friendship, and I'm looking forward to seeing what else you have on the horizon.
Yeah, this is great, Ryan. I'm sure we could do many, many more of these, and I'm game for it if you are.
We definitely will. We definitely will.
And I'll talk to Randy Wallace and give him a little nudge to be on
Please
the
do.
podcast.
Yeah, give him the nudge so we stop playing phone tag and make this thing happen. I know I would be excited about that. I know the guys listening would as well.
All right, I will talk to him because he would be great, and it would be great for everybody listening too. He's a wonderful guy.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it.
All right, see you, Ryan.